We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the deep sea. That's Sylvia Earle.
It's a classic quote, and it still holds true in so many ways.
Absolutely. And it sets the stage perfectly for what we're diving into today. We often picture the ocean, that vast blue, as maybe mysterious, sure, but fundamentally stable in its basic properties.
Like how light works within it, for instance.
Exactly. But some really significant new research suggests a fundamental property is changing how far sunlight actually penetrates the water.
Right. And this isn't just some small local oddity. We're talking about a global phenomenon they're calling ocean darkening. It's quite a major finding.
Yeah, based on what, almost 2 decades of satellite data.
That's right. This deep dive, it's all based on a study that just came out May 27th, 2025 in Global Change Biology.
The paper's called Darkening of the Global Ocean, and the authors are Thomas W. Davies and Tim Smith.
So our goal today is to unpack this. What is ocean darkening?
What did this specific study find? The scale, the potential reasons behind it.
And crucially, why does it matter? For marine life, for the planet.
And ultimately why it matters for you, our listener, whether you're tracking global environmental issues, maybe even for things like competitive exams, or you're just curious about our planet's health. This feels like a really important one.
It really does. It kind of shines a light, ironically, on something we might not think about much, the light environment within the ocean.
Okay, so before we get into the numbers, which sound pretty dramatic, let's set the scene. What exactly is ocean darkening in simple terms? And this photic zone they talk about, why is that so important?
So ocean darkening fundamentally means less light is getting down to certain depths. It's getting murkier, essentially, but on a massive scale.
And the photic zone.
That's the sunlit layer right at the top. It's defined technically as the depth sunlight penetrates enough for photosynthesis to actually happen.
Photosynthesis. So plants.
Exactly. Microscopic plants, phytoplankton. They're the base of almost everything in the ocean food web. So this photic zone, it's like the engine room.
The engine room. I like that. So if it shrinks?
Well, that's the concern. Most marine life lives there or depends on it. Fish, corals in shallower areas, mammals. They all rely on the productivity and conditions of that sunlit layer.
And it does more than just support life, right? Doesn't it affect climate?
Absolutely vital for climate regulation, those phytoplankton. They soak up huge amounts of carbon dioxide. So a shallower photic zone could impact the entire food web and the ocean's ability to, help regulate our climate.
Okay, got it. So this study used satellite data, you said, nearly 20 years worth.
That's the core of it. They used data from NASA's Ocean Color Web from 2003 right through to 2022. Huge data set.
And they used some kind of algorithm?
Yeah, basically an algorithm to analyze how light travels through seawater based on what the satellites see. And from that, they could calculate the depth of this photic zone for little patches, about 9 square kilometers each, all over the globe.
So the big question, what did they find? How much of the ocean is actually getting darker?
The headline number is over 20% of the global ocean has significantly darkened during that time frame.
20%, that's enormous. Can you put that into perspective?
Yeah, it's an area larger than 75 million square kilometers. It clearly shows sunlight just isn't reaching as deep as it used to across these vast regions.
Wow. And I read that in some places, the drop was even more, shocking.
Yes, that's where it gets really concerning. They found that in over 9% of the ocean, think about an area bigger than the entire continent of Africa, the photic zone depth shrunk by more than 50 meters.
50 meters shallower.
And in some spots, the reduction was even more than 100 meters.
100 meters. That's like removing dozens of floors from a skyscraper in terms of usable habitat. That's profound.
It really is.
But wasn't there also a finding that some areas got lighter? It wasn't all darkening.
That's right. And it's an important point. It shows how complex these ocean systems are. While the darkening trend was widespread and dominant, about 10% of the ocean actually saw the photic zone get deeper, meaning it became clearer or lighter during the same period.
Okay, so a mixed picture overall, but the scale of the darkening is the major story here.
Definitely the dominant trend.
So what's causing this? The researchers made it clear it's not artificial light pollution, right? Like lights from ships or cities?
Correct. They explicitly ruled that out. This is about the water itself becoming less transparent to natural sunlight.
So what are the likely culprits then?
Well, they think it varies. Near the coasts and in enclosed seas, the Baltic Sea is a good example. They mention it's likely driven by stuff washing off the land.
Like pollution?
Sort of, more like nutrients, organic material, and sediments. Think agricultural runoff fertilizers washing into rivers than the sea. Also, increased rainfall in some areas can flush more material off the land, basically more stuff in the water near the coast.
Okay, that makes sense for coastal zones. But what about way out in the open ocean, far from land? What could be causing darkening out there?
That's where it likely links more to broader climate patterns. The hypotheses center on changes in algal blooms, the timing, the size, the type of algae, and shifts in sea surface temperatures.
How would that make the water darker?
Well, changes in temperature can affect how water layers mix or stratify. That affects nutrient availability, which in turn affects phytoplankton growth. Different types or amounts of algae or other particles related to these changes floating in the surface waters can block sunlight from penetrating deeper.
Right, so changes in the tiny life and the water temperature itself, driven by climate shifts, are making the open ocean less clear.
That seems to be the leading idea for those vast open ocean areas.
Okay, so we have the wet ocean darkening, shrinking photic zones. We have the scale, huge areas affected, and the potential why runoff near coasts, climate-linked changes offshore. Now, the really big question, so what? Why should you, listening now, care about this?
This is the crucial part, isn't it? The potential impacts are, well, significant and widespread. We're talking about something that could affect a huge number of marine species.
How so?
So many animals rely on light, not just sunlight, but moonlight too, actually, for
Mm-hmm.
finding food, for avoiding predators, for navigation, even for reproduction. If the zone where they can effectively use that light shrinks,
It messes up their whole life cycle.
it potentially does, yes. And we rely on those ocean ecosystems, don't we?
Hugely. You mentioned climate regulation, but also, the air we breathe, the fish many people eat.
Yeah.
The overall health of the planet is tied to ocean health.
Exactly. Dr. Thomas Davies, one of the authors, basically said these changes shrink the available living space for animals that need sun or moonlight. It's a direct reduction in viable habitat volume.
And he concluded it's a cause for concern.
Genuine cause for concern was his phrase. It underlines the seriousness.
And the other author, Professor Smith, what was his take on the consequences?
Professor Smith pointed out how dynamic the ocean is, but also how sensitive light-dependent animals are. If that photic zone shrinks dramatically, like 50 or 100 meters less deep,
Those animals get pushed upwards.
exactly, they're forced into shallower water.
Which means more competition, squeezing more life into a smaller space.
Precisely. More competition for food, for space, for everything. And that increased pressure in a shallower layer could trigger fundamental shifts in the whole marine ecosystem structure. You're changing the rules of the game for countless organisms.
That sounds potentially catastrophic for some ecosystems. Where did the study find these changes were happening most intensely? Any global hotspots?
Yes, they did pinpoint some areas. In the open ocean, significant darkening was seen at the top of the Gulf Stream in the North Atlantic. And interestingly, also around the Arctic and Antarctic regions.
Arctic and Antarctic, that immediately flags climate change impacts, doesn't it?
It strongly suggests a link, yes. These polar regions are undergoing rapid warming, ice melt, changing circulation patterns. It seems likely those large-scale climate shifts are driving the light changes in the water there.
And what about closer to, say, Europe? Around the UK, for example, was it all darkening there?
Actually, no. Around the UK and nearby waters, it was quite a mixed bag, which really shows the regional complexity.
So where did it get darker?
Areas like the North Sea, the Celtic Sea, along the eastern coasts of England and Scotland, the Welsh coast, and the northern Irish Sea, those showed significant darkening over the 2 decades.
But some areas got lighter.
Yes. Interestingly, much of the English Channel and the waters north of Scotland up towards Orkney and Shetland actually became clearer or lighter during the same period.
So it's really not a simple, uniform picture everywhere. Local factors, maybe different types of runoff or currents, are playing a big role regionally.
Absolutely. It highlights that while there's a large-scale trend, the specific drivers and outcomes can vary quite a bit from place to place.
It's genuinely fascinating, but also quite sobering, as you said. It really connects the dots, doesn't it? How things like runoff from farms, perhaps hundreds of miles inland,
Can influence light levels deep in coastal waters, and how bigger climate patterns are altering the fundamental physics and biology of the vast open ocean.
it underscores how interconnected everything is and how vulnerable those ocean services we rely on, oxygen, food, climate stability, really are to these changes.
It certainly does. This research gives us some of the clearest, large-scale evidence of this specific type of environmental shift.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the core takeaway from this deep dive. Ocean darkening is real, it's global, It's distinct from artificial light pollution.
And it seems to be driven by a mix of factors: runoff near coasts, climate-related changes in the open ocean.
And the implications are serious for marine life, for ecosystems, and for all the critical services the ocean provides to us.
Understanding this is really essential, I think, for anyone trying to get a handle on the planet's current health and the challenges facing our oceans.
Absolutely. And it really leaves you with a thought, doesn't it? If our actions on land, even far from the coast, and our collective impact on the climate can cause such vast changes out in the ocean, seen from space.
What responsibility does that place on us? Individually, collectively? How do we understand and maybe start to mitigate these effects?
It's definitely something profound to ponder.
Indeed.
Hmm.
And just to remind everyone, this deep dive was based on that research paper, Darkening of the Global Ocean by Thomas W. Davies and Tim Smith, published May 27, 2025, in Global Change Biology.
So if you found this deep dive valuable, whether you're studying these complex topics, perhaps for exams, or just want to stay informed about crucial global issues, please do like and subscribe to our channel. We'll bring you more insights like this.
And please leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts, your questions. We really do want to hear from you and keep this conversation going.